Welcome back to this educational channel called Learn Bio with Janet. Today we'll be discussing another aspect of homeostasis, another example of homeostasis, which is the regulation of body temperature. This topic is from the KBSM Biology syllabus for Form 5 and it is found in Chapter 3. The subtopic is subtopic 3.4. The learning outcomes for today's lesson are as follows. After this lesson, we should be able to describe the regulation of body temperature. A, when body temperature increases above the normal range, and B, when body temperature decreases below the normal range. So this section is important for structured and essay questions, and sometimes they are asked in the objective questions too. Firstly, let us discuss why the regulation of body temperature is important to the health of a person. So a healthy person is usually able to maintain his body temperature in the range of 37 degrees Celsius to 39 degrees Celsius, despite slight changes or fluctuations in the temperature of his surroundings. So we're talking about the normal cases. So number 2, this is important for the optimal functioning of the body's enzymes, because our body's enzymes are sensitive to changes in temperature. All right, and enzymes can be denatured or destroyed by high temperatures above, let's say, 45 degrees Celsius, and they are made inactive by low temperatures, such as 0 to 10 degrees Celsius. So we need to maintain a constant body temperature so that we can allow the enzymes to function at the optimum temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius. So to do that, we must regulate the heat gained by the body and the heat lost from the body. The regulation of body temperature is sometimes known as thermoregulation. So the first structures involved in the regulation of body temperature are the thermoreceptors that help to detect the changes in body temperature. The word thermo means something to do with heat. Okay, so thermoreceptors are specialized structures like these that help to detect changes in body temperature and external temperature. So there are two types of thermoreceptors: warm receptors and cold receptors. Warm receptors are stimulated by heat and detect the heat in the environment. Cold receptors are stimulated by the cold conditions in the environment. So in the body, there are two types of thermoreceptors located in different places. The thermoreceptors in the skin, that is the warm and cold receptors in the skin, such as these detect changes in the environmental temperature or the temperature of the surroundings of the person. And thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus inside the brain detect changes in the blood temperature as the blood flows through it. Let's look at the position of the hypothalamus in the brain. So this is a side view of the brain, and here we see the pituitary gland in the projection here. The hypothalamus is just nearby to it, and it is a small part of the brain, but it's very important because it contains two types of receptors. The first are the thermoreceptors to help detect changes in the temperature of the blood flowing through it. And also, if you can recall, the hypothalamus contains osmoreceptors to detect changes in blood osmotic pressure. So the hypothalamus contains thermoreceptors and osmoreceptors. Let us now look at an overview of the mechanism of regulation of body temperature. What happens when a person experiences a change in the external temperature? That means the temperature of his surroundings. Okay, until the time the effectors act. So let's discuss what happens in the body. For example, when a person steps out from the house or even from the classroom into the hot sun, into the external environment outside the home or the classroom, and it's very hot. So there's a change in the external temperature. The temperature is higher than normal. So this will cause the body temperature to increase, for example. So there's a change in the body temperature. Next, the thermoreceptors in the skin will detect the external temperature and detect the temperature of the skin. And thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus, these are the central thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus of the brain, will also detect the temperature of the blood flowing through it. So it will detect changes in the temperature of the blood. So the two types of thermoreceptors will be stimulated and they will produce nerve impulses that are transmitted by the afferent neurons to the thermoregulatory center, also found in the hypothalamus of the brain. So this thermoregulatory center is very important to help regulate the body temperature. So because of the impulse that is sent to it from the two thermoreceptors, it will then produce an impulse or impulses to be sent via the neurons to the effectors, such as the effectors in the skin, for example. So these include the sweat glands, the blood capillaries and arterioles in the skin, the hairs and the hair erector muscles in the skin. Other than that, we have the adrenal gland and thyroid gland, which are also involved in temperature regulation, and skeletal muscles in the body also play a role, which we will discuss in the next few slides. So basically, we are still using this acronym, which I have used for the coordination by the nervous system. All right. S is for stimulus. In this case, the stimulus may be the heat in the environment. R is for receptors. The receptors here that regulate the body temperature are the thermoreceptors. Thermoreceptors. So thermo has something to do with heat, for example, and temperature. Now, so the receptors will then trigger an impulse. Impulse. Now, A is for afferent neuron, transmitted by afferent neuron to B, the brain, for example, to the hypothalamus of the brain. Then the brain will produce an impulse, which is sent via the efferent neurons to the effectors. Efferent neurons, and E for also effectors, is also for effectors. And effectors are the muscles and the glands. For example, the smooth muscles of arterioles, the erector muscles in the skin, and the skeletal muscles in the body. For glands, there are the adrenal glands and the thyroid glands. And all these effectors will produce responses that will help to regulate the body temperature and bring the body temperature back to into the normal range. So let's discuss the actions of the effectors. Okay. Let us look at 5 structures in the skin that help to regulate the body temperature. So these 5 structures are important to remember and you must be able to identify them and even draw them in a diagram of the skin. All right, you must be able to also label them in a diagram of the skin. So the first structure are the thermoreceptors, that is the warm receptors and the cold receptors that detect changes in temperature. The temperature of the environment can be detected by these receptors. Secondly are the erector muscles. So an erector muscle can contract to pull the base of the hair so that the hair becomes erect to trap more air. We'll be discussing the mechanisms that are carried out by these effectors, in the next part of the lesson. So Other than erector muscles and hair, we have the arterioles and the blood capillaries, which are the blood vessels that can help to increase heat loss or to retain heat in the body, depending on the changes in body temperature. And then lastly, we have the sweat glands that can produce sweat when we feel hot. So the acronym for these 5 structures is SHARE, S-H-A-R-E. S for sweat gland, H for hair, A for arterioles and blood capillaries, R for receptors, and E for erector muscles. Let us now discuss the responses carried out by the structures in the skin when a person is feeling warm and when a person is feeling cold. Okay, so we'll take the case of the warm environment first. So in a warm environment, when the body temperature increases and the person is feeling hot, firstly, the smooth muscles in the walls of the arterioles, which are small arteries, will relax. So when these smooth muscles in the walls of the arterioles relax, the lumen, the hole inside the arterioles, will become bigger. All right, so we say that the arterioles dilate, become bigger in diameter, and this process is known as vasodilation. Vaso has something to do with the blood vessels or vessels. So when arterioles dilate, more blood carrying more heat will flow in the blood capillaries near the skin surface. Now these blood capillaries are the branches of the arterioles. So if arterioles dilate and carry more blood, the capillaries will likewise carry more blood near to the skin surface, and this blood transports heat in the body. So more heat will be near the skin surface and the heat will be lost by radiation and conduction. This is so that the person can reduce the amount of heat that he has in the body when he's feeling hot. On the other hand, in a cold environment, the smooth muscles of the arterioles will contract. So always remember the muscles, even the skeletal muscles, contract in cold environment. And the hair erector muscles will also contract in the cold environment. So generally the 3 muscles contract in a cold environment. Now when smooth muscles of arterioles contract, arterioles will then become smaller in size. The lumen will become smaller and the arterioles will carry less blood. Okay, so the arterioles constrict. When muscles contract, then the arterioles constrict or become narrower. Okay, we cannot say arterioles contract. Arterioles constrict or become narrower, and this process is known as vasoconstriction. Okay, so there's a slight difference in the meaning of contract and constrict. For muscles, muscles contract, but arterioles constrict. Now, when vasoconstriction occurs, less blood carrying less heat will flow in the blood capillaries near the skin surface, right? So less heat will be lost by radiation. We have just discussed vasodilation and vasoconstriction. But let us look at the cross-section of the arterioles to gain a better understanding of what we discussed just now. So this diagram in the center shows you the normal sized arteriole when the body temperature is in the normal range of around 37 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius. And the wall of the arteriole contains the smooth muscles. So an arteriole is a branch, just a branch, a small branch of an artery. Now in a warm environment, the smooth muscles of the arteriole relax. So when they relax, they are not contracting, then the size of the arteriole will become bigger. The lumen, or the hole in the center here, will become bigger in diameter so that more blood flows through it. So we say that the arterioles dilate. That means they become bigger in size, in diameter. And this process is called vasodilation. This will allow more blood to be carried by the arterioles and also by the blood capillaries, which are branches of the arterioles. So that more blood carrying more heat flows in the blood capillaries near the skin surface, and more heat is lost by radiation and conduction. Okay, so you can see that there's a difference in the size of the lumen when the vasodilation occurs. And also, what about in the cold environment? So in the cold environment, the smooth muscles of the arteriole will contract instead. So remember that in cold weather, or when the body temperature is low, usually the muscles contract. For example, skeletal muscles can also contract when a person is very cold. Of course, they'll contract and relax frequently to generate heat, and this process is known as shivering. Okay, if the muscles contract involuntarily or without being controlled by the conscious will. Skeletal muscles can contract in cold weather, and so can the hair erector muscles. Hair erector muscles will also contract to pull the hair so that it will become erect. Okay, so muscles generally contract in a cold environment. And then when the muscles contract, the lumen of the arteriole will become smaller and it will carry less blood. So we say the arterioles constrict. It means they become narrow. The lumen becomes narrower, and this process is called vasoconstriction. Please do not say that the arterioles contract. Only the muscles can contract, and then the arterioles constrict or become narrow. So that less blood flows through the arterioles and through the blood capillaries near the skin surface, and it will carry less heat. The blood will carry less heat to the skin surface, so less heat is lost by radiation and conduction. Now let's discuss the role of the sweat glands. When a person is feeling very warm or hot in a warm environment, the sweat gland will actively secrete sweat. So more sweat is secreted onto the surface of the skin here. This sweat will absorb the body heat, and then it will evaporate, taking the heat away with it, and in that process it will cool down the skin surface. So when a person is feeling hot, because of the large amount of sweat on his skin, the evaporation rate of sweat is higher and more heat is lost from the skin. So this is a very effective way of cooling down the body. In a cold environment, the reverse occurs. The sweat gland is not active. It does not secrete sweat or secretes very little sweat. So evaporation rate of sweat is lower in order to conserve the body heat, to keep in the body heat so that the heat is not lost to the environment. Let us look at the third structure and the fourth structure of the skin that's involved in temperature regulation. These are the hair erector muscles and the hairs of the skin. So in a warm environment, the hair erector muscles will relax. When the hair erector muscles relax, they do not pull the hair. So the hair will move a little bit to the other side, say to the left here, and the top part of the hair will naturally move to the right. Just like you take a pen and you move it so that the base goes more to this side, then the top part will move more to the right. In this way, the hair will lie flat near to the skin surface. So it will trap just a thin layer of air. Now, air is a poor conductor of heat and is an insulator to prevent heat loss. So in this case, when the layer of air is thin, it will allow more heat to be lost from the skin surface to the environment by radiation and conduction. Okay, so hair erector muscles relax, hair lies flat, a thin layer of air is trapped so that more heat is lost from the skin surface. On the other hand, in a cold environment, the opposite occurs. The hair erector muscles will contract. Okay, as we have said, in cold and conditions, or when the body temperature is low, muscles will usually contract. So the hair erector muscles contract and pull the base of the hair here towards it. Okay, in this direction, to my right. So the top part of the hair will move to the left, and so it will become erect. All right, and this will trap a thicker layer of air because the hair is erect. So air is an insulator to prevent the loss of body heat because it's a poor conductor of heat. Thus, less heat will be lost from the skin surface through the layer of air. Less heat will be lost by conduction and radiation. Now, when the hair erector muscles contract, sometimes you can see there's a bump on the top of the skin, a mini bump. And this is when we get the goose pimples when we feel cold, because of the hair erector muscles that contract and cause a bump to be formed here. Another thing is that for humans, because humans have less hair on the skin, this method of trapping air and trapping heat or preventing heat loss is not that effective compared to animals that have a thick layer of fur, especially organisms that live in the cold places like the polar bear, very cold places. So the polar bear has a thick coat of fur which can trap a lot of air that acts as an insulator to prevent the loss of heat. So far we have discussed 3 structures in the skin that act as effectors to regulate body temperature. So let's discuss the rest of the effectors and let us go through all the corrective mechanisms carried out by effectors when the body temperature increases or decreases. So for this first part, we'll discuss corrective mechanisms by effectors when body temperature increases to be above the normal range when the person is feeling hot. So there are 2 ways of regulating body temperature: by physical means, using the structures in the skin, for example, and regulation of body temperature by metabolic processes, meaning by using chemical processes in the body to either generate heat or produce less heat. Let's talk about the physical means. So we have discussed a few of these just now. Smooth muscles in the walls of the arterioles will relax, so that the arterioles become larger or they dilate. The process is known as vasodilation. So more blood will flow in the capillaries near the surface of the skin, so that more body heat will be lost from the blood by conduction and radiation. Secondly, the sweat glands will be active and produce more sweat. When the sweat evaporates, it will first absorb the heat from the body and then it will evaporate. So this will cause heat loss to be increased. The heat lost will be more from the body. Thirdly, hair erector muscles relax so that the hairs lie flat, so that they trap less air, and this will cause more body heat to be lost easily through the skin surface. Skeletal muscles do not contract and there's no shivering when the body is feeling warm. What are the ways of temperature regulation by metabolic processes when a person is feeling hot? So this involves the glands, the adrenal glands and the thyroid gland. So adrenal glands are a pair of glands just above the kidney, and they are triangular, more or less triangular in shape. Then we have the thyroid glands in the neck region. So adrenal glands will secrete less adrenaline when we are feeling hot, and the thyroid gland will secrete less thyroxine, because these 2 hormones help to increase the metabolic rate. So if there's less adrenaline and less thyroxine in the body, the metabolic rate will decrease. So the rate of chemical reactions will slow down, such as the rate of respiration. It will decrease so that less heat is generated, less body heat is generated, so as not to increase the body temperature further. Now, all these points are important, especially for structured and essay questions. So do try to memorize the points. And if you're asked to elaborate more on the structures in the skin, then you have to refer back to the last few slides where we discuss in detail about the responses carried out by the smooth muscles, the sweat glands, and the hair erector muscles. Now let's discuss the corrective mechanisms carried out by effectors when body temperature decreases below the normal range or when a person is feeling cold. So again, these points here are important for structured and essay questions. Right, by physical means, the smooth muscles in the walls of the arterioles will contract when a person is feeling cold. So we say the arterioles constrict or become narrower or smaller in diameter, and this process is called vasoconstriction. Less blood will flow in the capillaries near the skin surface, and less the heat lost will decrease. Heat loss will decrease. Now, sweat glands are not active, and sweating will stop or be reduced so that the heat loss will decrease, or there's less heat lost. Hair erector muscles will contract so that the hairs become erect to trap more air, and this thick layer of air is a poor conductor of heat and a good insulator to prevent heat loss. So the heat lost will also decrease. Number 4, skeletal muscles will contract and relax frequently and involuntarily. That means it cannot be controlled by the conscious will. This produces the action called shivering. In Malay, we call it menggigil, and in Chinese, it is fakto. So this will produce heat when the skeletal muscles contract. Heat is produced, so the body will gain some heat to increase the body temperature. Now, by metabolic processes, adrenal glands, more adrenaline will be secreted by the adrenal glands, and more thyroxine will be secreted by the thyroid gland. So these hormones will increase the metabolic rate, or the rate of chemical reactions in the body, such as the rate of respiration. So when the metabolic rate increases, more heat is produced to increase the body temperature so that it goes back into the normal range. Here is a schematic diagram that shows the regulation of body temperature using the negative feedback mechanism. Alright, so this center part, the corrective mechanisms, have been discussed just now. But I just want to show you how a schematic diagram is drawn to show the regulation of body temperature. Right? So let's say a person has the normal body temperature, and body temperature may increase when the person goes out into the hot sun or starts to exercise. So then we have to mention the receptors that detect the increase in body temperature, which are the thermoreceptors in the skin and hypothalamus. Okay, and these thermoreceptors will send impulses to the various effectors, such as what we have discussed earlier here. Is the same thing as the previous slide. Okay, and then because of all the corrective mechanisms, the body temperature will decrease back to normal, and this is a form of negative feedback. On the other hand, when the body temperature decreases below normal, there are still corrective mechanisms that occur, and this will increase the body temperature back to normal, and this is again a form of negative feedback to correct the changes in the body temperature and bring the body temperature up again back to normal in this case. Okay, so you can copy this diagram into your book, and it can be asked in the structured or objective questions or even essay questions. Here is a very good memory aid or acronym which I have thought up to help you remember all the structures involved in the regulation of body temperature. This acronym is very useful for essay and structured questions. And once you've remembered the structures involved, you can then discuss the corrective mechanisms carried out by them in the regulation of body temperature. The acronym is bathes in sweat, a very suitable acronym for this topic. For example, if a person is very hot, he or she will produce a lot of sweat that will wet the face and also make the clothes damp. So the person is said to be bathed in sweat. In this case, it is bathes in sweat. B stands for blood vessels, such as arterioles and blood capillaries. The arterioles can constrict or dilate depending on the changes in body temperature. And this will affect the amount of blood flowing through it and through the blood capillaries, so that more or less heat will be lost from the blood through the surface of the skin. A is for adrenal glands, T is for thyroid gland. These two affect the metabolic rate. If more of the hormones are produced, like adrenaline and thyroxine, if more of these hormones are produced, they will increase the rate of metabolism and the production of body heat. H is for hair in the skin or on the skin, and E is for erector muscles, which contract to pull the hair so that the hair becomes erect. From this word erector, we say that the hair becomes erect when the erector muscles contract in cold weather. S is for skeletal muscles that can contract and relax frequently and involuntarily to cause shivering in cold weather. And sweat stands for the sweat glands. So try and remember this acronym that is very useful for essay and structured questions. Let us discuss a very good forecast HOTS exam question or Solan Ramalan for the essay section. Question 1. A student enters a conference room to attend a meeting for 2 hours. The air conditioner is on at full blast and the room temperature is 16 degrees Celsius. Explain how his body carries out homeostasis to regulate the changes in his body temperature. 10 marks. Okay, so read through the question a few times. That's the technique of answering. And also underline the main points. Room temperature is 16 degrees Celsius. Okay, then underline how his body carries out homeostasis, changes in body temperature. Okay, so you have to ask yourself what happens to his body temperature in this room. And then from there, you have to outline the processes involved in homeostasis. So I would suggest that for any essay question, you should first write out an outline of the answer or a concept map or a schematic diagram to jot down the main points involved. What are the steps taken in homeostasis? What's the mechanism of thermoregulation? What are the corrective mechanisms? And so forth. After that, after you have planned your answer, only write the answer out in full as an essay. So take some time to think about this question and time yourself. It must be within it must be within about 15 minutes. Your answer must be written, because it's only half of the marks, half of the marks of the essay, of one essay question. Okay, one essay question is 20 marks. So 15 minutes for this answer. And let us look at the answer in the next slide. So you can screenshot this question or just pause it and try to answer the question first on your own. Now let us look at the model answer for this question. Firstly, we must mention that the room temperature of 16 degrees Celsius is lower than the body temperature of the student, whose normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, so because of this, the body will lose heat quickly to the surroundings and the body temperature will decrease below, I must mention below the normal body temperature. Alright, so first we have to mention that the change in body temperature is that there's a decrease in the body temperature below the normal body temperature. Okay, so that we can mention and explain about the effectors that help to retain the heat and increase the body temperature back to normal. Okay, now, so before that, let's talk about the mechanism, how the receptors detect the changes and then send impulses to the control center and so forth. Okay, so the thermoreceptors, that is the cold receptors in the skin, detect the decrease in the environmental temperature. So if it is an increase in environmental temperature, then we talk about the warm receptors. But in this case, there's a decrease in environmental temperature, so the cold receptors, which is a type of thermoreceptor, detect the decrease in the environmental temperature. And thermoreceptors are also found in the hypothalamus that detect the decrease in the blood temperature. Next, the thermoreceptors are stimulated. They will produce or trigger a nerve impulse transmitted by afferent neurons to the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus of the brain. Then the thermoregulatory center will send impulses to the various effectors so that they will decrease heat loss, act to decrease heat loss and increase heat production, so that they can bring the body temperature up, increase it back so that it can be raised back to the normal body temperature. Okay, and you can take note here that the acronyms RBEMR applies to this process of thermoregulation, the mechanism. S for stimulus, we mentioned that the stimulus is the decrease in body temperature. Okay, R are the receptors, the thermoreceptors. I stands for impulse. Okay, the thermoreceptors will trigger a nerve impulse transmitted by afferent neurons, A for afferent neurons, to the brain, the hypothalamus in the brain, B for brain. Then I for impulse, thermoregulatory center sends impulses to E for effectors, and via the efferent neurons, another E is for efferent neurons. Then the effectors are the muscles or the glands, as we will see afterwards, that will carry out the responses to help increase the body temperature so that it goes back to the normal range. Now, continuing with our model answer, now we can discuss the various structures involved which help to regulate the body temperature when the person is cold. Firstly, vasoconstriction occurs, and you can add on because the smooth muscles in the walls of the arterioles contract. So arterioles in the skin constrict or become narrower, less blood carrying less heat flows in blood capillaries near the skin surface, so heat loss by conduction and radiation is reduced. Secondly, sweat glands. Even though they are not active, we have to mention it here, and sweating and evaporation of sweat is reduced to conserve heat. Thirdly, hair erector muscles will contract so that the hairs become erect to trap a thick layer of air, which insulates the body by preventing heat loss through conduction and radiation. Fourthly, skeletal muscles all over the body, will contract and relax frequently and involuntarily, so the body will shiver and produce some heat. The person may rub his hands voluntarily to also produce heat when he's cold. Now, the glands. Adrenal glands secrete more adrenaline. Thyroid glands secretes more thyroxine. And both these actions increases the metabolic rate and also the rate of respiration. So more heat will be produced to increase the body temperature. And all these processes will cause the body temperature to be increased back to normal. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. Please share, like, and subscribe. And see you again in the next video. Goodbye.